everybody, my name is Brock and welcome back to week number 5 already of our ReEngage online experience. For those of you that are new or going through this, again, there'll be questions attached to this video that I'd like for you to answer by yourself, and then come together with your spouse and kind of share those answers together. If you're in a closed group, this is kind of your opportunity to watch this before your closed group, to discuss this in that situation and see what you can get from this video, or see what you don't like about the video, which is more likely the case. But if you're looking to get involved in a group in ReEngage, just know that we're working on that, and hopefully by next week we'll have that problem solved. And so thank you for your patience as we try to navigate that. And so we've gone over a few things here in these videos, and just as kind of a summary, real quick summary, we started off by saying that marriage, oftentimes, if we can change our thinking, we can change our marriage and change the way we view marriage. And so we've gone over a few concepts like draw a circle around yourself. You can't change another human being. You can only change yourself. We've gone over the concept of God-centered spouse versus spouse-centered spouse, that we don't respond to our spouse because of what they've done or didn't do. We respond because of what God wants us to do. And the last one we talked about last week was make sure that your spouse, in your mind, is always the most important person in the room, the person that you're called to serve. But one of the things about these videos, it's really just exploded. Again, there's been one or two people that have made comments, my wife and one of my kids. But we've talked about some of my social distancing observations. And if you wouldn't mind, just for a moment, I'm going to get political. I'm sorry about it, but I feel like I have to get political for just a moment. All right, so here I am, Political Brock. Ready? Thank you guys for tuning in today. I'd like to go over my political stance for the upcoming election. One of the things that I have always been intrigued by is traffic. I don't understand traffic patterns. I hate being stuck in traffic, and living in the DFW area, we're very much aware of traffic. But this pandemic may have shown us the answer to solving traffic problems, because technology might be the answer. Because we've all been staying at home, so traffic is way reduced. And so maybe the idea of people learning to work from home more often can actually reduce traffic. It can reduce emissions that are probably harmful for our environment. It can even save lives, because if we're not on the roads as much, accidents go down, lives are saved, traffic is not as frustrating and busy, and people aren't making bad choices. So it can actually save lives. And it can save a lot of money as well. I'm a father with 3 children that are all drivers, and it's very expensive to have insurance for these people. So we can not only save the environment, we can not only save lives, but we can save money as well. So why wouldn't you vote for me to reduce traffic by ensuring people that should work from home more often? My name is Brock, and I endorse this observation. Thank you for my political rant. All right, so enough of that, because we're here to talk about marriage, right? But that's a decent social distancing observation. But in talking about marriage, one of the things that's always intrigued me, and this first part, it'll make sense in a second, but World War II has always intrigued me. I love reading stories. Like, one of my favorite stories is by a guy named Viktor Frankl, who was a Jewish psychologist that was in Auschwitz, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he tells his story about being in Auschwitz and getting out, and all the different things that he went through, and kind of the psychology that he developed from that, just the how to deal with such intense scrutiny. I also like the story of Louis Zamperini called Unbroken, where he's in a Japanese concentration camp, and then he goes back later in life after he gets out of that and forgives his captors. And so I'm in awe of these people, because I don't quite understand forgiveness. I don't know if I could follow in their footsteps at the level of forgiveness of which they are at. Yet in marriage, I think forgiveness is one of those key factors for us having a healthy marriage. Because there's the obvious things that we've struggled with, and they're very painful, recovering from affairs, emotional and physical, just even abusive situations, down to not dealing well with finances, or not helping around the home or whatever, not having great listening skills. So forgiveness runs this gamut. And yet I feel like forgiveness has to be kind of a main thing that we continually fight for in our marriages. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating staying in an abusive relationship or a harmful relationship. I think we should take steps to make sure that we're safe, for sure. But I just wonder if maybe a lot of times, especially in the more day-to-day things, if we need to be quicker to lean on forgiveness than we do walking away from things. Let me explain. There's a story in Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 through 35, where Jesus tells a story about a man that owed a great debt. And so he went to the king, and the king demanded this guy be thrown into jail. And the guy started begging, Lord, forgive me. Master, forgive me. I don't have the money to pay it back. And so the master had pity on the guy and said, look, I'm going to forgive you this huge amount of money. and you can walk away and it's all's forgiven. So the guy walks out and he sees a buddy of his that owes him just a little bit of money in comparison. And he goes to the buddy and says, "Hey, you owe me that money." And the buddy says, I can't pay it. I can't do it. And so the guy demands and kind of browbeats the guy and even just goes after him to get his money back. And the king's guards or his workers kind of see this and they go and tell the king. And so the king responds like, "You unmerciful servant," he calls him. "I've forgiven you a great deal. Shouldn't you extend the same to those that you see?" And I really think that's a factor and a major piece of Christianity is that God says, "I'm going to forgive you of your massive amount of need and sin that you have in your life." And now he says, "I want you to learn from that, and I want you to do the same toward other people." And so forgiveness is a major theme in the Bible. And there's no doubt about it. The Lord's Prayer, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who have sinned against us. It's kind of a major piece. And even after that prayer is taught, Jesus says, "Hey, I want to emphasize one more thing again." There's a lot of things in the prayer he could have emphasized, but he said, "I want to emphasize one more thing again, that forgiveness toward others has got to be a major piece in this whole situation." So forgiveness is a big deal. And because God has forgiven us a lot, now we're asked to forgive as well. So what is forgiveness then, ultimately? Because sometimes that can be a nebulous or a weird concept. And so let's start with what forgiveness is not. And so many of you know I do a podcast called the Mindful Marriage Podcast, and I do that with a therapist named Tara Wiedemeyer, and Tara is always teaching me stuff. And I do think sometimes that she thinks she's better than me, but I'll forgive her for that. I'll work on that since this is the lesson. But Tara always says in the podcast, and as we talk about forgiveness, that forgiveness is not forgetting about what has been done. There's still things to be worked through. Forgiveness is not condoning a behavior. There's still things that need to be worked through. And oftentimes, forgiveness is more about you than the other person. Because unforgiveness, as she deals with clients, can do a lot of damage in our souls if we're unwilling to do that thing. So it can really damage us. And the one who is hurt often needs just as much processing as the one who's caught in some type of addictive or sinful or hurtful behavior. So what is forgiveness then, if that's what it's not? What it's not. What it is then, is I wrote down this definition that psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person who has harmed us, regardless of whether they actually deserve it or not. So it's this conscious decision that we're not going to hold on to that. And so at ReEngage, we often say it this way. At its most basic level, forgiveness is the decision to pardon an offense and give up the right to be repaid. At its most basic level, forgiveness is the decision to pardon an offense and give up the right to be repaid. So, what does that mean then? What does it mean to give up the right to be repaid? I think I've told the story here before, and it's a classic story I tell where there was my wife and I share the dishes, and there was one night she got mad at me for not cleaning the dishes, and I was in the right, the whole thing. At least that's how I remember it. Okay, let's just go with that story. And so giving up the right to be repaid looks like this in my marriage, that it doesn't matter if my wife Alicia ever apologizes or even remembers that event because she made a mistake. Again, as I see it. It's me giving up the right for that apology or even that acknowledgement that something happened. It's just learning how to let that go and not having to hold on to every little thing that takes place. Ken Sande, S-A-N-D-E, wrote a book called Peacemakers, and he says that one of the lost arts of us living in peace with other people is learning how to let little things go. Not always demanding to be repaid or not always demanding an apology, but almost say, hey, I'm going to make this conscious decision that I'm going to let that go, even if they never acknowledge it or say it to me. And that's a kind of a big time drawing the circle around ourselves event, saying I've got to work on me and not so much worry about them. It's also, I think, forgiveness as we understand it in ReEngage is being quick to initiate our need for forgiveness where we've made mistakes, because all of us are going to make mistakes. All of us sin and continually sin. I'm sorry for goes a very long way in our relationships where we own up to our part and not even expecting them to say, well, I'm sorry for my part too. Because there was times in my relationship where I'd say, well, I'm sorry for this. Now it's time for you to admit what you're sorry for. And that usually didn't work, but we just say, own up to my part. We're giving up the right to be repaid, whether they say anything back to us or not. We're giving up our right, but we're just saying, here's what I own. We're quick to own our part. And I love it when therapists call this repair, because that speaks so loudly, because it shows we want to repair any damage that we've created. We can't worry about what damage necessarily they've created, but what damage have we created? And apologies should be a part of our routine. Repair of where we've messed up should be a continually part of our routine of life. And so I think the theme for this lesson is giving up the right to be repaid. We just forgive, we initiate, we do our part. And again, I'm not advocating if there's been severe trauma or difficult things, we need to go talk to someone, a pastor, a therapist, someone to kind of help us work through that. But again, maybe we lean toward forgiveness a little more quickly. I've seen couples recover from unbelievable circumstances, unbelievable situations, and still find healing in their relationship. So giving up the right to be repaid, and it's taking on the right of apologizing, controlling what we can control, which is our part in apologizing. If they don't apologize, we let it go. If it's something major we can't work through, we just can't seem to forgive or consciously make that decision, we go and get some help. So finally, in Matthew, at the end of that, or at the beginning of that story, it's just a beautiful way to start that story. And I omitted this purposely at the beginning. But it says, then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times, because that was kind of the tradition, that 7 times seemed like a lot. And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, or 70 times 7. And when I was a kid, I did the math, as I've always been kind of a Bible geek, and 490, and that's not what Jesus is saying. He's saying that forgiveness is unlimited. We keep forgiving, just like Jesus does for us. My friend Rhett, who's a therapist in this area, Rhett Smith, he says it this way. Forgiveness is unlimited. We keep on forgiving. Later sessions, we'll talk about what to do if we can't work through it and initiating a conversation. But right now, let's just work on that letting things go piece. Forgiveness is initiated and sustained by God. God started the whole process. He gives us power to do it, so we've got to kind of plug into his power, continue to ask him for help. And forgiveness is about you more than necessarily the other person. Because oftentimes unforgiveness can slow us down, derail our path, and put us in a negative light. And so, as we kind of look at forgiveness, this idea about giving up the right to be repaid, I pray that we would have strength to do that and realize that this is kind of a healthy way of living. And maybe the next time we apologize and they say nothing back, we can let that go and kind of deal with that with God. And if it gets too crazy, we talk about it, we get some help. But good luck on our journey of forgiveness. We all need it. We need it toward each other. We need it to our spouses. We need it to the world around us. But this is what God has called us. This is the lifestyle he's called us to do. Again, he emphasized one thing after the Lord's Prayer. He said, don't forget about that forgiveness part, because I've forgiven you so much. Thank you, guys. Have a great week. Please let me know if there's anything that we could talk about and work through anything. But I'm here to support you guys and help you have a great, great rest of the week, and that your marriages continue to thrive as we work on forgiveness. Thanks, guys.